All right, so for this video, I'm going to kind of orient you guys a little bit to the editor. We're going to do a couple quick examples. It's really not as difficult as what you might think to code. Uh, we just have to really understand how we need to speak to the computer to make it run what we want. And we need to understand how to read the references. So that's the main thing. We're going to go through the P5js website. I'm going to kind of show you some different features and stuff that we will be adopting. We'll go into the examples tab, kind of open a couple things just so you guys can see there's a lot of stuff that we can check out in there. We'll go into the libraries area because we will be eventually implementing a lot of different libraries. Some that we'll create by hand for timers for collision, but then we'll end up adopting those libraries, being able to use sound, to have that. We're also going to be doing animations and all kinds of other stuff in this course to make games. Okay, so we'll walk through a couple of those examples. All right, so when we have the editor, this is the editor. To get to the reference, all we need to do is just click on help and then we can click on the reference. Okay, so that brings us into the main site. We have our navigation on the left-hand side and it automatically just opens up into the reference. Okay, this is topic based. So if I wanted to do something with shapes, I can click on the topic, or I could actually just type if I wanted to look up how to do something like, say, do a circle. And then I can read, oh, this is a method in P5. That sounds like something I might want. Okay, so we will delve into that a little bit. Now on the left-hand side, we can get back to the editor by clicking on the editor. But when we also open that up, from the editor, it just opened it as a separate tab. Okay. Now you could click on learn and you could see, a couple quick examples, but we're going to quickly get, from that. Let's go ahead and click on the examples. Now there's a lot of different examples of things that we could do that people have put in, over the years. So stuff that we can show like real quick. All right, so comments and statements. This has been mentioned in the video that you guys already previously watched, but anything with double slashes, those are comments. Okay. Now, P5js is built of two functions. That's the default. It always has two functions. We will end up having more. When we look at our code, we have comments. Okay, and we have two functions. We know that they're functions because they start with the keyword function. We have the setup function, which, and I'm going to write comment for it, only runs once, okay, at the start. And the draw will run continuously from the top to the bottom until the program is stopped. Now, generally, this will run, draw will default to 60 times a second. And I'll kind of show that real quick. Okay, so 60 times a second, setup runs once, draw will run over and over and over and over and over and over and over. Okay, so that's basically our program. So when we want to do stuff, we end up needing to create variables, we define them, we set them up once before we start really wanting to run our program, and then we build our program. Okay, so when we go into examples, we can see stuff kind of running. I'll give a little bit more information. On here, we created a canvas. We don't have to create a canvas over and over and over. We just have to create it once, and then we can draw on it as many times as we want. We can change the color as much as we want. Okay, if I go back into the examples, I can see other things. We're going to be talking about coordinates because it's a little bit different than how we normally see coordinates when we're looking at stuff like in math. So this is some examples that you could click and see some pretty cool stuff. Let's see, like particle systems. Let's open that up. So someone created a particle system, which is just a bunch of points that have a die-off period and they have a point where they open up. Game of life. just different things. We're not actually building Game of Life, but we will be building a bunch of other different games. Okay. So the other area that we will spend some time in is libraries. And libraries is what you learned from the video. Is it's like a pre-built set of functions that we can use to help enhance our code. We're kind of standing on the shoulders of others to make our programs faster. So that's why we're using P5js. It's kind of a framework already created for us to make it easier for us to draw and see things visually. But we can also do other things like sound. That has become a core part of P5js. So it's easier for us to add sounds like music and sound effects for our games. And there's just a lot of created libraries that people have done over the years that helps to enhance. So some of them, let me scroll down. So some of them, depending if you wanted to play around with P5js, say with Arduino, you can actually use this library and help connect things up. If you wanted to have a different color space, we're going to be using Collide 2D when we get into collisions. And we are going to be making some games, and we'll do a little bit more from scratch, but there's a lot of features that we have in here. If we wanted to have a little bit more camera control, we could, add some of these libraries depending on what we wanted for them. Scrolling down, if we wanted to use joysticks, we could do that. If we wanted to map, like let's say that we wanted to map like real world and kind of do like a little bit of AR, augmented reality, or we wanted to display a game around certain objects on a screen or in only the windows of a door, we can use, say, this one. The other one, P5 Play, it's pretty cool. There is a little bit higher of a learning curve, so I'm not really jumping into that one for you guys. The other thing that we will be using is probably the timer that will happen later on. And yeah, that'd be about it. Okay, so these are just ones that we can use. And I'll start orienting you, because part of being a good programmer is that you're learning how to use libraries. You're learning how to use the references. Okay, so I mentioned that P5js is built on it's like a framework. So let's click on the reference, and we wanted to create some shapes and kind of understand what those shapes are. Okay, so previously you have already created some circle shapes. So let's look at the rectangle shapes. Okay, so we want to create a rectangle. Now, when I'm in the reference, it shows me what the command is, or the statement for running this piece of code. Okay, and then we can see some examples. You should not only rely on the examples, we should be looking down at the description and the syntax. Not everything has a full description, but almost everything in the reference will have a syntax, and this is basically the way that we can write it. There are two different ways that we can write to draw a rectangle. Okay, now, anything with the square brackets and the references, this stands for something that is optional. So let's look at just this one right here. This is a command, rect, in parentheses, and my first parameter, that's the first thing that's required, is the x coordinate of the rectangle. The second one is the y coordinate. The third one, and this is optional, is the width, okay? And then the first optional one is h, which would be the height. So we could create a rectangle. Now let's just try to create one only using x, y, and w, okay? So I'm going to come in here, and I'm going to write in my draw. So I'm going to click inside of these squiggle brackets. That's very, very important that I'm clicking always inside of the functions. And I want to create a rectangle. So I need to give it an X, a Y, and a W. That's what it said. It said an X, a Y, and a W. But I need to give it some type of values. So let's say I'm going to do 200, 200, and a W, and I'm going to say 50. Okay, I want to finish every line with a semicolon because that is like my statement terminator. It's like my period. Okay, I can go ahead and click the play button, and now that runs. Okay, and this is my rectangle. Okay, now I put my canvas. My canvas is 400 by 400, but this is not exactly centered. And the reason is because rectangles are automatically drawn from the upper left corner unless I make some changes to it. And that is done by using rect mode. Okay, so we're drawing from the top left corner. So if I put this at, let's say 0, 0, 0 for my x and 0 for my y, where do you guys think that's going to be? Is it going to be in the bottom left? That's what we're used to. Let's go ahead and run it. It is in the top left because our origin is different when we are doing computer graphics. Origin is always at the top. Okay, so I want to do something kind of cool though. We have built-in variables in P5js. And I'm going to go into the references and we're just going to click on them. mouseX, that is one of my built-in, okay? mouseX, and I can see it used right here in this line function. It is tracking the mouse position in the X direction for my mouse, okay? And now it gives me a description. Says the system variable mouseX always contains the current horizontal position of the mouse relative to 0, 0 on the canvas, okay? So that's kind of important because if we are trying to do some different things, it may not be tracking that exact position. Right now we are defaulting to the origin being in the top left. So let's go ahead and change this mouse X for the rectangle, and then let's rerun. And now, look, that rectangle is moving around to the X direction of my mouse. It's pretty cool. It looks like it's being animated. Let's change this one, you guessed it, to mouseY. That's our other built-in, and we can do a search for that also in our references. And you're like, Mr. Walters, how did you actually know that? Well, if I go into references and I'm looking up by topic, okay, I can look up different things and try to find stuff in here. I'm going to click on events, okay? And events are things that I want to happen at certain times, and I can see different things like this. Anything with a set of parentheses is a function. It's going to do something. Anything that doesn't have that is holding a value. So I see moved X, moved Y, mouse X, mouse Y. I can actually look up those. P mouse X and P mouse Y is my previous mouse position for the X and the Y. So if we run this with mouse X, mouse Y, now we have this moving with the mouse, but it's drawn from the top left corner. That is pretty cool. That's using the reference. We've learned about a built-in for mouse X and mouse Y. Now I want to show you something though. Setup, I said runs once. We create a canvas, okay? Now this is a piece of code that is creating this size of this canvas, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. So I have two values in here, and I can go ahead and I can look in the references to get a little bit more details about this. Okay, let's look at CreateCanvas. Okay, it's talking about it on how it's building it. Now, what do we see as the syntax? Width, height. Okay, that's what we have. The width of the canvas, the height of the canvas. So that means that the width of our canvas is 400. The height of our canvas is 400. If I change this to 800, my canvas gets longer, but it's still just as wide. Okay. If I want to put this to 400 and I wanted to put this to 600, I now have a wider canvas and it is not as tall, okay? This represents the largest X value that we can have. When we get into graphics, this represents the largest Y value. It is the size of my canvas. Okay, now this runs once. I only need to create the canvas once. Now, that's my setup. Setup runs from this squiggle bracket to this squiggle bracket. That is called a code block. A set of squiggle brackets is called a code block. Now we are running our setup. Once that runs, and it does not matter if the setup comes in a different order than the draw. Okay, the setup in terms of the program for P5js, setup runs first, then draw. The order in this doesn't matter. But in code, when we get into a function, we are running line by line until we get to the bottom at the end of our code block. And if it is something that is repeating, it will come back to the top and continue on. That is what draw does. So what I want to do is let's move this background piece of code, which all this does is just changes the background of my canvas to a different color. Let's move that to right underneath my setup. I want you guys to see what happens. Now, when I run this, okay, my canvas still looks the same, but now my draw, every frame, which is 60 times a second, I am drawing a rectangle at a different mouse position. It's whatever my current mouse X and mouse Y is. So watch what happens. Look at that. Okay, this is drawing 60 rectangles every second. Okay, and what we looked like before, it looked like the rectangle was moving. It's really not moving. It is a trick. We are redrawing the screen and redrawing a background to cover up all of the previous rectangles that's been drawn on the screen, to clear it out and draw a new one. Okay, so really this is what it looks like, but and that's because the background only ran once. Now if I have my background running before my rectangles, what's going to happen? Nothing. I don't see anything anymore. I still have the rectangles. They're still getting created. This code is still running, but I am clearing off my screen every single time I'm drawing a rectangle and then putting a background right on top of it. I'm putting this entire color right on top of it. Okay? So if I want to have the color of the canvas be, let's say, black, and then I want to draw a rectangle right on top of it, and I want it to look like it's animating, I have to have the background be something that gets called every time draw gets called. If I want the rectangle to look like it's moving, I need it to be called every time in the draw. If I have a position that does not move in the draw, it will stay there. It's not going to show any type of animation. The only way that I can really get animation on any of this stuff is I have to use variables, and that's what we're going to be jumping into after we learn how to draw and use the references. Okay, that's it for this video. We've oriented you to the website, showed you guys some examples. We talked about the libraries. We went through some example code, kind of explained the setup and the draw, and how to use the built-in functions that we learned already for mouseX and mouseY. All right, good luck. Have fun.